All right, so looking at this, I had the same question myself. Why is Boneshatter the #2 league starter in softcore trade this league? And honestly, I had no idea. This is a league where there are many compelling league starters that are faster, that scale way better. For all intents and purposes in a softcore trade environment, should just be better. However, Boneshatter, as you can see, is #2 behind Righteous Fire for the most popular league starter of this league. Just like with Toxic Rain and playing with minions previously, I wanted to continue exploring what are the meta builds, why are they the meta builds, and why do people play them even when on paper they shouldn't be as popular. So what I did over the past 3 days is I put together a Boneshatter character. It was very interesting. There were a lot of lessons learned. Full caveats before you watch this video, I am not a master of this build whatsoever. This is very, very much out of my wheelhouse. I did the best that I could to learn as much as I could about the build, but I'm sure there are some pretty gaping holes in my knowledge here. So forgive any mistakes or anything about, talking about this. I'm sure there are plenty of things that I could do to have put this together better or whatever, but the whole purpose of this is just to try to understand why people even play this build. What is the appeal of it? So let's start talking about it. So we're going to format this one a little bit differently than last time. We're just going to go right into a map, and I'm going to try to show off what this build is and why I think it's so appealing to people. So really, I think the short of it is 2 answers specifically. People like bonking things. People that like melee want to do melee. Sadly, in Path of Exile, there are very few ways without a lot of investment to feel incredibly powerful with melee. And then the second one is just as Righteous Fire is the #1 league starter this league, a lot of that is like the cult of Righteous Fire, headed by Grand Priest Pox with all of his disciples, making sure that they are fully indoctrinated in the life of Righteous Fire. Very cozy, very tanky build. Boneshatter right behind that. It has a ton of support because it is by far the most popular and most effective hardcore solo self-found build. And because of that, there's a lot of support for the build. And people that want to be tanky, I think in general, most players, as we're learning these days, most people are just sick of dying. And they want to make a build that is defensive and tanky. The short of it is you basically need to be Pathfinder, Champion, or Juggernaut to, at low investment, reach that level of defense that I think most players want. Maybe Trickster right behind that. But pretty much any Witch Ascendancy, even most Templar Ascendancies besides Guardian, definitely Assassin or Saboteur, they just really don't fit that, that layer of base defense that most players want. And so something like Juggernaut, which gives you a lot of armor, gives you elemental reduction as well based on armor, totally solves freeze and chill and stun and all that type of stuff right off the bat. You get endurance charges, less damage taken, really solves so much of that stuff that most Ascendancies just can't do. And I think that's the comfort that a lot of people want to go for. And so, yeah, I think what most players want to do is they just want to be very tanky no matter what, particularly on their league starter. And, after that, then they can go into something else a little bit later when they have currency to put into it. But my current setup right here, and, I'm just going to let these guys hit me. My current setup right here is roughly somewhere less than 5 divines. I took out all of my alternate quality gems. I have like a ROG craftable axe right here. I even crafted cold res on it just to deal with my resistances. I don't have any alternate quality gems, besides Phantasmal Leaf Slam, which is giving me nothing. Just a little corrupted belt right here, Hinocorus sight, no other uniques or anything like that. This is a sub 5 divine setup. You could definitely put this together in the first week of the league. Even in solo self-found, you can get pretty close to this in about a week. There's absolutely nothing crazy about this build whatsoever, or any of the gear that I put on. I took off all of my nice gear, and this is like the budget setup. The one nice thing that I have, this would be the expensive thing, would be a double Pride Watcher's Eye. But, I mean, we can just take that out as well. This is not necessary whatsoever to play the build. Besides that, yeah, this is the budget setup, and very achievable in less than a week. Not a single alternate quality gem, just all regular 2020s, 2120s. And, yeah, Boneshatter just gets the job done. As you can see, I'm very, very tanky. Incredibly tanky. Now, there are some things that make us less tanky, particularly damage over time. We don't have a lot of solutions for degens, and particularly anything that turns off our recovery, our recoup, or our regen. That will absolutely, dumpster our defense. But in a regular map, right? I'm in a moderately rolled up, 113% quant, T16 map. And as you can see, like, I can go AFK and I'm just fine, right? Like, as you can see, I'm sitting here with 113,000 armor, 89,000 without my flask up. I have 84% lucky, spell suppression chance, so it's closer to like 95 plus actual spell suppression with 56% spell suppressed, 80, 78, 78 on my res right there, as well as minus 30% extra crit damage reduction. And this is the budget setup. Like, you know, like I said, this is roughly 5-ish divines or so. You know, I dropped out my Watcher's Eye and all that. And yeah, I think this is the main appeal, right? It has not as much to do with the skill itself. So it's really the it's really the fact that the base character, the fact that you're playing Juggernaut, the fact that you can go into max res, very high armor, and spell suppression all together with a ton of additional physical damage reduction. You know, I think that's I think that's the main appeal right there. However, I do want to highlight one of the big downsides, like, of this budget setup. This is obviously not as bad when I have expensive gems, but as you can also see, the build is very, very fast, right? It's actually, like, as a mapping build, I would consider this S tier for mapping, even in softcore trade. It is very, very fast, even in the budget setup. Can I tank this? Yeah, look at that. I could even tank that. Very, very, very tanky, right? Pretty darn good. However, when we get to the single target, this is the problem. So the first thing is we are melee, and this comes with so many downsides. So if you've never played melee before, to min-max your damage as a melee build, you have to scale a lot of buttons. You're scaling buttons. You're not scaling raw damage. You are scaling the buttons that you're pressing. So what we need to do to, you know, min-max our offense and our defense, particularly for single target, is we need both Ancestral Protector as well as Ancestral War Chief, as well as we need to continually reapply our Blood Rage for increased attack speed. We need to, you know, scale our Rage to Berserk as well. For a strike-based build, we need to do that. You know, Vol Ancestral War Chief, if we have that up, as well as a War Cry. We're using Ancestral Cry right here because we want to get particularly additional armor, because the way that Boneshatter works is the more times that you attack, you build something called a trauma stack. And these trauma stacks make you hit yourself harder. However, you also hit harder. So you're basically hitting yourself every time you attack. You get these trauma stacks that you can scale by increased skill effect duration, or, you know, you could do self-cast temp chains or whatever if you wanted to do that. But the more trauma stacks that you have, the more physical damage that you're taking as you're attacking as well, you're outputting more damage. So as long as your recovery of your life and your physical damage reduction outdo the damage that you need to do to the monster, you're okay. However, like I said, right, we have to cast these totems on the ground. Ancestral Protector gives us more attack speed, and Ancestral War Chief just gives us more melee attack damage. And by having these two totems down, which unfortunately requires at least 3 gem sockets, because by default, right, you can only have one of the totems out. So to have both of the totems out, we need Ancestral War Chief as well as Protector and multiple totems, so we can have, you know, more of our totems out, so we can have 2 different totems instead of one. Bare minimum, right? We have to go in there, we have to summon 2 different totems. We need to give up 3 of our gem sockets even to do that. If we get too far away from the totems, we lose the buff. If the totems get killed, particularly if the boss is doing AoE, that's a pain in the ass. And we have to reapply our Blood Rage, we have to manually do Berserk, and we have to be close enough to the monster to attack them with our strike as well. And so we go in there, we summon our totems, hit our Blood Rage, and we sit here and we attack. And then we'll see I have this thing called Trauma Stacks. Your Boneshatter skill is more powerful. However, you'll see that I start to do more and more damage to myself. My physical damage reduction is really good here. But we'll start doing more and more damage to ourselves to the point where we have to kind of back off. We have to let the Trauma Stacks drop off so we don't hurt ourselves too much so that we die. As you can see, like, took out my Watcher's Eye and everything. This is a sub 5 divine setup. Week 1 of League, you know, totally solo self-found viable to put this together. This is, I think, really the big thing, right? Is it's a very fast build. It's an excellent mapper. It is very fun to map with. Obviously, it doesn't have the clear of a bow build or anything like that, but it's incredibly comfy for just not dying, and it's fun to play. Now the downside is I'll show a clip of me doing Uber Shaper last night. Even at very high investment, this build hits a pretty big wall for scaling. And you're just never going to feel incredibly awesome doing Ubers on this build. Like, no matter what. Even if you throw 100 Divines at this, Ubering is just going to feel a little uncomfortable no matter what. Just due to the way that this build works. You want to maintain those trauma stacks. You want to scale them up. And when the Ubers teleport around and when they go invincible and all that, your stacks drop off. And they do enough damage, even with a very tanky jug, for you to kind of get into an uncomfortable spot where, you know, they put a degen down or something, particularly like Cirrus degens or Uber Maven degens, anything like that. That's going to turn off your recoup, and then you're just going to accidentally do too much damage to yourself. So severe issues for doing Ubers and getting into high-end bosses with this build. But in terms of mapping, I think this is just straight up an S tier mapper. It really is. And I understand the appeal there. Big things here, if we want to write down the pros and the cons. Pros, scales incredibly well at low investment, up to roughly 20-ish divines. Maps super, super fast and clean. Also the way that Boneshatter works, just to continue talking about the mechanics here, is when you stun an enemy, it'll release an AoE pulse. And this pulse has increased AoE based on the stun duration, up to 400% increased area of effect, which is at about 2.7 seconds on stun duration. So the closer you can get to 2.7 seconds stun duration, you want to scale that as much as possible. It'll release a 400% AoE pulse, hits basically the whole screen in front of you and blows up the whole screen by itself. So this way we don't have to really scale AoE, too much attack range, anything like that. And I think that's like one of the big things that makes Boneshatter comfy for mapping, is it has a built-in, like, hey, I'm scaling something that's quality of life for my build, and it makes clearing a lot easier as well. Can get as tanky as possible in the game, right? There's all sorts of things you can do. Scale into something like Divine Shield. I've seen Dawnbreaker setups. I've seen Aegis Aurora setups. You're going to do less damage with a one-hander. You can scale your defense as much as you want. Like, this is a build that can deep delve. I've seen examples of it going to 2,000 or 3,000 depth with just Boneshatter. So you can get it as tanky as you want. I think players really like being tanky. They hate dying. That's always been an issue for me making builds, is I come from a softcore trade background where I don't mind dying that much. On League Start, I'm going to value something Toxic Rain, back in the day, right? Like a Toxic Rain Raider or something like that, where going fast with Cast on Death Portal is just going to be better than most melee builds. However, I do want to say that Boneshatter is so fast because we get so much attack speed. Like, a big thing here is we get an incredible amount of attack speed from Undeniable right here. We actually want to scale as much accuracy as we can get. This is actually one of our best ways to scale the damage in the build because, more attack speed, more trauma stacks, more flat damage. And this is a non-crit Impale build. So we want to scale our Impale. We're not doing crit at all. We're actually doing Precise Technique because we're going to have so much accuracy rating, right? Like, this is actually going to be way outstripping our life, of course. So very, very tanky, super fast mapping, some of the most efficient scaling that you can get. I think people just like bonking, and, melee, walking up to a monster, punching it in the face, and, and winning that fight is a very satisfying feeling. Even if it's mechanically not ideal, people just really like it. However, cons. Scales very poorly past about 50 divines. This is a build that doesn't want you to put more money into it. I on stream the other day, I was comparing versus Tornado Shot, where Tornado Shot is like, it's full like Dami Mommy on you. And it's just like, if you don't pay me 50 divines a day and keep upgrading me, you're not going to get my services anymore. Go back and earn me some more money, because I don't want to see you if you're not going to pay me up. Pay up, baby. Whereas Boneshatter is the opposite. Boneshatter's like, no, keep your money. Buy yourself a nice dinner tonight. Just relax. I'll take care of you. Don't worry about it. You already spent 5 divines on me. We're good. In a League Starter scenario, that's obviously incredible for, early scaling. You want to have a build that, hey, you put 5 divines on it, you're done. You're doing T16 maps. You're doing 20, 40% delirium. You're doing, non-Uber bosses. Everything that you need for sub 5 divines, that's great. And then you can just use that to farm up for whatever other build you want to go for. However, past about the 50 divine range, this build does not give you very much, right? And I'll talk about like the high-end gear over here that I have some pretty nice stuff. Put a Mage Blood on it and everything. The difference between the 5 divine setup and the 100 divine setup, it was not that different. I was already hitting the wall basically at 5 to 10. You don't want to go past that. It's melee. You got to be melee range. As much as people like that, the downside is any monster that shotguns you, like a big essence monster, Ubers are going to be teleporting around. Uber Cirrus would teleport onto a bunch of his puddles, and since the puddles turn off my regen, I can't even attack Cirrus in a puddle because my recoup is going to be turned off, and I would just immediately do too much damage to myself. Being melee has severe downsides in the game, based on the game design, because we just don't have that much, anti-damage over time, and the monster's just teleporting around. Requires 3 gem sockets equaling 2 totems. Requires both totems. Also, best way of scaling damage is Panopticon. If you've never played a build that uses the melee totems, you go to PoE Ninja. This node by itself is your #1 way of scaling your damage. 50% increased effective buffs that your totems get while active. So instead of Ancestral Protector giving me 18%, this is a more attack speed multiplier. Instead of 18% more attack speed, this will give me to, what, 27% more attack speed. And then with Vol Ancestral Warchief, so this 32% more multiplier goes to a 48% more multiplier. And you get both of those for Panopticon. So you'll see for at the highest level investment, you'll see I have this on my ashes right here, for scaling your damage to the best that you can. Unfortunately, Panopticon is the way to do it. And this node is an absolute nightmare, right? This is 5 points to get to it, or it's your anoint. Going through Ironwood is okay. The totems live longer. That's not the worst use of your points, but it feels really bad because while you're mapping, you're not going to have your totems up anyway, unless you're doing, ritual. Maybe you'll drop it or something once in a while. But yeah, you're not going to be dropping your totems very much. So that's a very high investment for something that's only for the bossing aspect of your build. And being split that way always feels really bad. Like, you put a lot of resources that are only for the bossing version or only for the mapping version, and then you either change passive points or change your anoint or whatever, and no one likes that. No one likes gem swapping. That's just a really annoying thing about melee builds in general. Best way of scaling is Panopticon. Have to scale accuracy plus strike range, multiple resources that spells don't have to scale just to feel comfortable. Lots of buttons for buffs, 2 totems, Rampage, Blood Rage, lots of buttons for conditional buffs. That's the really annoying thing, right? Totems, Rampage, Blood Rage, Vol, Ancestral Warchief once in a while. Maybe I want to hit Vol, Molten Shell as well. 2 mobility skills as well. As you can see, and Warcry. Most of the time, right, I'm just doing Leap Slam, Boneshatter, and that's just fine. But then I have to make sure my Blood Rage is up. I got to Rampage periodically, drop both totems. Maybe I'll do Vol Ancestral Warchief. I got my Warcry on left clicks. That uses up my left click slot that, maybe there's a world where I want to do manual Molten Shell, something like that, and I just don't have buttons for it. Weak to damage over time, and recovery disables, and doesn't boss well. And I think that kind of goes over it pretty well. I do recommend this build. Like, if you are melee curious, I think this is a great build to play. I think it is very fun. I was pleasantly surprised. There was way more fun to play than I thought it would be. But I was very disappointed at, throwing more money into it and seeing that it was just at a hard wall and just mechanically against bosses. It felt so bad. It felt so bad. All right, so this is me doing Uber Shaper last night. As you can see, it took a while. And you can see, this is my high investment. This is the version with the Mage Blood on. Man, it just did, as you can see, that was the damage over time that wasn't showing as I walked in right there. You only get 3 seconds as well when you phase in on Uber Shaper. I don't know why they made that change. But as you can see, just like damage over time really, really hurts the defense of this build. We have to be melee. Trying to sustain our trauma stacks is an absolute nightmare. And dodging everything is so awful, right? Like, I'm just attacking him there to keep my trauma stacks up more than anything. And like, there's so many downsides here of trying to do this build. I was really excited to be almost done with this, right? And then, yeah, I want to summon my totems to try to get my damage uptime, right? Like, 50% of my damage is having my totems. Where am I going to put my totems here that's going to keep them alive without them just instantly dying? Obviously I can't, right? So I'm missing half of my damage, probably half the time. Like, they're just not being up at all. Another 30% of my damage probably comes from having my Rampage and my Rage stacks up, or my Berserk rather. And I'm just not going to have that very often because, I can't generate my Rage quickly enough. He's going invincible all of the time, teleporting around. Like, okay, well, now I got to wait until I get my Rage stacks up and get my trauma stacks up, dodge every single thing. Luckily I'm tanky enough that I can live through walking over all this stuff, but yeah, that was an absolute nightmare. I did kill Uber Cirrus. I did Uber Cortex Deathless as well. Uber Cortex was actually not bad at all. For a lot of these different Ubers, this build, just like the mechanics of it, just don't feel awesome. Melee that also requires a lot of different active buffs that you have to have going all the time. Particularly, the totems were based on Rampage, Blood Rage, all of that type of stuff. Like, all these conditional things really make it, like, if you want to do Ubers, I can't emphasize enough that this is not a build that's going to scale into it in a way that you're going to be happy. So you're going to want to have like a backup build, like level a Ice Trap Assassin or something for doing Ubers. But for mapping, I do think this, 100%, like, I think this is an S tier build. Now, I'll just quickly go over the build. Like, again, this is not a build guide. This is not a build mechanics overview. So as you can see, I have about a 900 PDPS axe right here. We put this together really quick. This is an axe that you could get Really quickly, a couple days into ROG crafting, I bought the Fractured Tyrannical right here, but it's only about 900 PDPS. I only spent 10 minutes crafting it. I even am using it for res and all that, so this is not a crazy axe. Inside the axe, we're using Boneshatter, Melee Fizz, Close Combat, Brutality, Ruthless, and Fortify. So that's our regular little setup right there. In the helmet, I'm using Frostblink right here, Ancestral War Chief, multiple totems, and Ancestral Protector. Like I said, our totems are a significant percentage of our damage. Both of the rings are just res rings with armor, accuracy. Damage taken recouped his life is really, really good, right? Because we're hurting ourselves. That really offsets a lot of our damage taken. On top of that, if you could put in a Progenesis, right, that works as well. That's really, really big. I'm using Hinekora Sight. This is just a 5 chaos. Amulet gives us more accuracy, more spell prevention. The accuracy is really big for our attack speed because it scales with our Juggernaut passive. Gloves, accuracy, spell suppression, life, impale on hit, as well as additional strikes. Magnate is basically best in slot for the belt. Gives us 10% double damage, 5% triple damage. As long as we have 400 strength. I'm actually missing 8 strength. I've been swapping the gear around a lot. But yeah, you want to have 400 strength. You get 5% triple damage right there. I'm missing that at the moment. So body armor, you want to go for as much physical damage taken everywhere that you can. Increased armor, physical damage reduction. This was very cheap to put together. Just grab a glorious plate. I think the fractured armor was like 10, 20 chaos. Find the cheapest fracture that you can get. And then the cool thing is we want to go for no life on our body armor. And we can go for the 15% increased maximum life if there's no life modifiers on your body armor. And so we get a lot of life right there. That allows us to scale our armor really well. Here I'm using Precision, War Banner, Pride, and Determination. Later on, at higher investment, you do want to put in a Enlighten as well as Arctic Armor. We're always standing still when we're attacking, so 20% less physical damage taken is huge for additional PDR. That allows us to offset a lot of our damage from our trauma stacks, but that's at the higher investment. Not necessary for mapping whatsoever. I have Berserk in my ring right here. Boots, spell suppression, life regen, action speed. These are just boots that I already had. I didn't even recraft them or anything. Life tap, cast some damage taken, Molten Shell, Warlord's Mark. Warlord's Mark is our rage generator, as well as gives us some leech right there, which is really comfy. Ancestral Cry on our left click. This gives us a lot of melee strike range as well as additional armor. So, really good for this build. Vitality, because this worked with my Watcher's Eye. That's the only reason I was using that. Blood Rage. Later on, you do want to switch to Anomalous Blood Rage. And Leap Slam right here just to get around really quickly. The passive tree is the passive tree. That's the nice thing. Very, very simple. No cluster jewels, nothing. Like I have an empty jewel socket right now because I took out the Watcher's Eye. Max res, armor. You want to go for stuff with axes. Axes is your best in slot, so we're going for axe stuff everywhere we can go. The one thing that I have here is the Forbidden Flesh and Forbidden Flame. Where is it? Right here for Unyielding. Unyielding is really nice, gives us damage per endurance charge, area of effect of endurance charge, as well as increased stun duration. Remember that increased stun duration for our Boneshatter gives us bigger AoE for better clear. And these are very, very cheap. So right now in the league, they are less than 1 divine each. Yeah, very, very cheap right now to put together. Obviously on League Start, you wouldn't have this, but this is really just for clear. You don't need this whatsoever. Now, if you don't have Unyielding yet and you're not generating endurance charges, then you can put in endurance charge on melee stun instead of ruthless support. So that's what you're going to use until you have Unyielding right here. And then, yeah, we go for spell suppression, life, armor. I actually don't need this anymore because I have the Warlord's Mark. I actually don't even change the passive tree at the high investment versions. That's it. That's the low investment, sub 5 divine setup right here. Very, very comfy S tier mapping build. Not good for Ubers, but great for basically everything else. Fun build. I get it. Incredibly tanky. Very, very fun. I'm using Soul of Solaris and Grukthul, right? We want physical damage reduction. Obviously, that's anything that says physical damage reduction, that's what you go for in this build. And then at the high investment, I'll just give you guys a quick overview. You want to go for a bigger axe here. Still, this is not a very expensive axe. It's a 1400 PDPS axe, but a lot of that is because of the tree right here. It's a multi-modded axe. It has Fractured Merciless, and then just Essence of Contempt until you hit, T3 or higher on your hybrid accuracy and physical damage. And then you can just multi-mod, attack speed, double damage. Because this is not a crit build, we don't care about any of that. So multi-modding it is actually totally fine to do. And so this is a higher investment axe, but it's still not very expensive. Not too hard to put together, as long as you can snipe one of those good fractures. And then we want to go for Divergent Pride, Divergent Boneshatter, Anomalous Close Combat, Awakened Melee Fizz, and Awakened Brutality. And then we still use Fortify in our 6th link right here. Divergent Boneshatter it gets attack speed per trauma. However, you do take more physical damage per trauma. Increased attack speed per trauma, right? This gets pretty high, particularly when you're using an Ashes. So with an Ashes, that then goes up to 2% attack speed per trauma. If you can sustain 40 trauma stacks, which is about the cap that I was able to hit, that's 80% increased attack speed, which, you know, is obviously insane. Other thing with the Ashes, Phantasmal Ancestral Protector gets a lot stronger. Anomalous Blood Rage gives you Frenzy Charge when you hit uniques, so you can sustain that when you're bossing. Divergent Arctic Armor, even less physical damage taken while stationary. With the Ashes, that's another 1% off as well. Watcher's Eye Ideal is double damage and Impale, double Pride, and then I got the life recovery rate Vitality. And then if you really want, you can go for Mage Blood. Mage Blood with the Basalt and the Granite Flask was giving me nearly 200,000 armor, which really good. I think that's as much as I should do talking about this build. This is really one of the most explored, most played builds out there. Plenty of build guides out there. That's not what this is whatsoever. This is just a really cool build that, you know, wanted to get out of my wheelhouse, continually exploring why do people play builds that are so popular, especially ones that I generally would not gravitate towards. I think it's important for us to explore all of the stuff that's out there and understand the game at a deeper level. And I learned a lot. I learned a ton playing this build. I think this is probably the first time I've played a full on-hit Impale melee physical build ever. I really don't think I've ever done it before. The closest is Bleed Gladiator builds in the past, but yeah, I learned a lot doing this. It was a very good experience. If you guys have suggestions or ideas for other builds that I should try out that are meta builds, not just some weird quirky thing, but meta builds that you think I should explore that, you know, I usually haven't done or played in the past, I'm all ears. Let me know in the comments below. Yeah, thanks for watching. I'm very excited for XLCon. It's getting closer and closer. Man, I'm leaving in a week to get ready for XLCon, so it's going to be crazy. Fingers crossed for PoE2 announcement and all that. I'm really excited. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time. Goodbye.